Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I'd like to call this meeting of the 2024 budget to order. We have regrets from Councillor Longo and Councillor Lischena. Committee members, do we have any declarations of pecuniary interest? Seeing none. We have no consent items today or confidential consent items. So right now at this point, I think I'd like to pass the pulpit over to our CAO, Ms. Closey. CAO, the floor is all yours.
Thank you, Chair. So I'm pleased to introduce the 2024 budget today. In August, the Mayor gave direction to staff to prepare an operating budget at a rate of 4.5%. The budget being presented over the coming days is a culmination of a tremendous amount of work by staff in order to pull and develop a reasonable budget projection in a climate of persistent inflation. So in the presentations, you will hear good news and exciting projects. Financially, we remain in a strong position. Overall, Oakville is thriving and growing, is a thriving and growing community. People come here to raise their families and access our great programs and services. With this growth comes increased service requirements that challenge our capacity to deliver. While we have mechanisms to address the growth, in many of our service areas there are gaps that need to be addressed. The legislative changes that have recently taken place have placed municipalities have delivered for us many changing realities in our day-to-day business and requires investment in our internal support staff. If we're not internally strong, we cannot deliver external excellence. So in this budget, you will see investments in data and information management, and this allows us to make those data-based decisions, which move us forward in a very key way. Customer service to meet the legislative requirements that the province has been delivering to us. Human resources to focus on our attraction, retention, and preparing a staff complement that can address the issues of the future. Security you will also see in the budget, and that's both physical as well as IT security. Our ongoing drive for continuous improvement and efficient service delivery, a key outcome of Council's strategic plan, also requires a capacity to unlock efficiencies. Pardon me. The unlocking of these efficiencies has become difficult in recent years. We've been identifying savings throughout the budget process for quite some time, for actually as long as I can remember, and the easy stuff through our budgets has been done. The 2022 budget, the last year budget, included a $500,000 in savings that was to be achieved by 2025, and we have achieved about $175,000 so far. Achieving further efficiencies will require much more difficult work than we have been able to accomplish in the past. It is my responsibility to present a budget to the Mayor and the members of Council, which will ensure the organization is prepared for the future and can deliver on its legislative requirements, the Council's long-term strategy, as well as your four-year action plan. You will see through the presentation economic indicators in the financial overview that we need to pay attention to, specifically related to our long-term capital forecast. Long-term, we have a clear picture of the financial pressures that will be facing us. Under these pressures, we can maintain a strong financial position, but it will need to come with setting priorities, making choices on the programs and services we intend to deliver. We also need to consider alternative sources of revenue in order to fill those gaps, and we need to advocate for new funding strategies from our other levels of government if we want to retain that strong financial position that we're currently in. I have a tremendous amount of pride in our staff and how they continue to deliver exceptional service to this community within the budget directions that Council has provided. So with that introduction, I will pass it over to Jonathan, our Director of Finance, Jonathan Vanderheiden, who will provide you an overview of the overall budget. And he'll be followed up over the next couple of days with the Commissioner presentations as well. Jonathan?
Thank you, Jane. If we can pull up the presentation, please. Thank you, Eddie. All right, thank you for that introduction, Jane, and good morning to members of the Budget Committee. I'm excited to be here today to provide an overview of the 2024 draft staff prepared budget for the town of Oakville. I have a little agenda here to organize the various things that we'll be talking about this morning, and you'll see this slide come up as we go through each of the different points. So we're going to start with our budget process. So I'll run you through a few reminders on some of the parts of the budget process that we have here at the town. And I'm going to start with this slide here, which you've actually seen before. This is the timeline and approval process that we are using for this year's budget, or at least the public portion of this year's budget. I'll go through this slide in a bit of detail to ensure that all members of the Budget Committee and the public are aware of where we are and what our next steps are. And as I do this, I'll add in some commentary about the internal processes that we follow here at the town in building our budget. So before I dive into that, and just as a reminder, there are some differences in this process from what we've done in the past. For one, this is the first year for which strong mayor powers are applicable for Oakville, and this has necessitated some of these changes. For another, at last year's budget debrief session, Council expressed a desire to have the public more involved in the budget process. And as you can see on the screen, items with a gold border indicate or incorporate public consultation into the budget process or into the meetings themselves. So this flow chart starts at the top with the budget forecast report that was provided to Budget Committee in July. However, internally, the budget process is already underway at this point. In early summer, Finance kicks off the budget with staff, and then throughout the summer, we meet with the departments to talk about their budgets, their work plans, and upcoming projects. This work takes a fair bit of effort as we try to build as accurate and realistic a budget as possible, utilizing past experience and upcoming expectations about our program levels and outcomes. During the same time, members of the Budget Committee had the opportunity to consult with residents on the budget, and you can see that in the first gold-bordered box in the top row. Early in September, staff provided 4 reports to the committee on some specific and pressing issues to determine if they should be incorporated into the budget process. Later today and on Thursday, you'll have the opportunity to hear from each of our commissioners, and they will touch on those various issues in their presentations. If you move to the second row, on September 19th, the Budget Committee received feedback from each ward on the public consultation. The commissioners and myself have taken back these comments, and you'll see those responses to the questions in the presentations today and on Thursday as well. During the month of September, staff are extremely busy working on the staff-prepared budget. The finance team, along with members of the town's management team, directors, and commissioners, work through each department's budget, evaluating the assumptions, considering the various initiatives, and looking at the capital forecast. Finance then compiles everything together to present to the executive leadership team for their review and consideration, as not every request can be included. Once everything has been finalized, staff work on pulling it together in the budget book, which has been released this week for you and for the public to review. And I see some of you already have in front of you. And during this time, the commissioners are also pulling together their presentations, which you'll see later today and this week. There is one thing I do need to flag about the October 17th and 19th meeting that you see on the screen here. In a previous version of this slide, we had the release of the rates and fees on November 20th in conjunction with the release of the mayor's proposed budget. However, we wanted to provide as much time as possible for the public to consider the rates and fees, and so they've been included on the agenda for today's meeting. So that's a little change. So that brings us to our next 2 gold-bordered boxes in this middle row. Those, for the rest of October, Budget Committee has the opportunity to hear from residents on the draft budget. This can be done individually by each councillor. However, there are also 2 specific meetings that have been set aside to hear from members of the public. Residents or community groups are invited to come. They have to register with the clerk in order to delegate, but then they can share their thoughts on the budget. These meetings are on October 31st in the morning and November 1st in the evening. Following these meetings on November 2nd, the Budget Committee has the opportunity to pull together their own thoughts along with those they've heard from residents and provide any recommendations to the mayor before he releases his budget. This meeting on November 2nd will be the final meeting of the 2024 Budget Committee. And then on November 20th, and you can see on the slide in front of you, the mayor will provide his proposed 2024 budget. This box is all in blue, as this is actually provided to all of council and not to the budget committee. And then just over a week later, there's a special meeting of council where council can receive additional public delegations on the mayor's proposed budget. And again, that's why it has that gold bordered box. And then finally, the last box in the bottom right corner of this slide is where we have December 20th, and that's a special council meeting at which the 2024 proposed budget will be considered. So now I'm going to switch to another slide to outline what would happen at that time and at that meeting. And again, it's one you've seen before. This is our budget decision flow chart. As you may recall, when Doug Carr, our town solicitor, was up here earlier in the summer, he touched on this slide and a number of the components of the Strong Mayors legislation and walked us through this chart. And it follows a relatively straightforward process. If an event happens, we follow the yes in gold. If it doesn't, then we follow the no in blue. So beginning at the top, you can see that the head of council will provide a proposed budget, and that is what the mayor is planning to do on November 20th. And this starts the clock ticking on some of the timelines as per the legislation. Once the mayor presents his budget, council has 30 days within which to pass a resolution to make any amendments to the budget. And that is why we have scheduled a meeting for December 20th, which is 30 days after the mayor's budget is presented. At that meeting, if council does not pass any resolutions to amend the budget would be deemed adopted and the process is complete for 2024. And you can see that in the box under the council, under council passing a resolution. If they're not passing it, it's deemed adopted. If council does pass any resolutions to amend the budget, we move to the next set of boxes. The mayor would then have the opportunity within 10 days to exercise his veto power on any of these amendments. If he opts not to exercise his veto, then the budget would be deemed adopted as amended by council. So if you follow that no again. If the mayor does utilize his veto following the yes, then within 15 days at the end of the veto period, council may vote to override the mayor's veto, requiring a 2/3 majority vote to do so. If council does override the mayor's veto, then the budget would be adopted, including council's amendments. If council does not override the mayor's veto, then the budget would be adopted without the amendments vetoed by the mayor. And I should be clear on this one thing about this chart. It's a very simplistic chart. In a situation where council proposes numerous amendments and the mayor accepts some while vetoing others, the amendments that everyone agrees to would be adopted regardless of how a council override goes. So that's this year's process. But let's talk a little bit about the budget principles that we use in building out our budget here at the town of Oakville. There are a number of factors each year that we need to consider as finance and as an organization, and I've listed a few of them on the slide and I'll touch on them briefly. As you well know, council sets various strategic priorities to guide and shape the organization, and these have an impact on how, where, and when we spend our funds. As the current council has just released a new strategic plan, this has been incorporated into the budget process and into the budget book, and you'll see that coming up on the next slide. The next bullet down is mayoral direction. Earlier this year, Mayor Burton directed staff on some key parameters in building the staff-prepared draft budget. I have a separate slide on those that I'll refer to in a moment. The third bullet is PB2 methodology, that is performance-based, program-based budgeting. This means that we focus on programs rather than departments, and we have an emphasis on the allocation of resources based on desired outcomes and the measurement of program results against those desired outcomes. In a couple of slides, you'll see how we match our programs with council's strategic priorities. Service levels. We build our budget around maintaining services and service levels that are valued by our residents. From time to time, this necessitates changes to various programs which can have a budgetary impact. Sound financial position. The town's finances have been well managed, and as a result, the town is in a sound financial position. Our capital and stabilization reserves currently exceed the recommended levels from the Government Finance Officers Association, and the town's debt levels are within both the provincial and internal limits. As we evaluate capital budget considerations, it's important to consider the impact that these projects will have on reserve and debt levels and allow us to maintain our strong financial position. Included as a staff report for today's meeting is a comprehensive summary of the town's various reserves. As you'll see in that report, while our stabilization and capital reserve levels are currently strong, some of our equipment reserves are struggling and the long-term forecast for our capital reserve is showing a notable decrease. I'll touch more on our reserves in more detail later. However, for this slide, the important thing to keep in mind is that building out the budget requires us to keep one eye on the current service levels and tax rates, and the other eye on the long-term financial sustainability of the organization. Infrastructure and asset management. Infrastructure is a critical element of the town and our ability to deliver services that residents need and rely upon. The town has over $4 billion of infrastructure under our control, and it's a very important thing that we take good care of it. The town has established a corporate asset management plan, and it's continuing to build its asset management culture. Asset management and the corporate asset management team play a big role in helping to establish the budget. The team works with departments to evaluate capital and operating requests and needs, taking risk and whole life cycle costing perspectives into account to determine the best way to prioritize the various requests. Included on today's agenda is a report from Catherine Hewitson and our asset management team outlining the state of infrastructure and our approach to asset management. And finally, growth. As the town continues to grow, this has an impact on our budget. This impacts us on the capital side with new projects that need to be completed, and these are primarily funded by development charges. It also impacts us on the operating side as we need to consider the operating impacts of these projects and ideally match that with the growth we are seeing on the assessment roll. All right, strategic priority areas. So a few minutes ago, I mentioned that the strategic priorities set by council are one of our budget principles. So as you can see here, these are the key areas of focus for council, arranged into 4 different groups or buckets, and they're all connected with the town's vision to be a vibrant and livable community for all. As members of council, you're probably more aware of these 4 strategic priority areas, but I think it's a good reminder to list them out here, and they are growth management, community belonging, environmental sustainability, and accountable government. As we move to the next slide, you'll see how we've grouped each of our programs under one of these areas to help connect the budget with council's strategic priorities. And so as you can see here, the priority areas from the previous slide have been matched with the various town programs underneath. The finance team has worked with our strategic initiatives group to arrange our budget book so that it is organized in a similar manner to these key focus areas. I also want to point out one thing about growth management. The growth management category here is not the same as our capital growth projects that you'll see later in the presentation. This category refers to how we manage growth across the town, whereas the growth projects later on refer to those specific projects driven by growth within the town. So I just want to stress that difference now to avoid any confusion later on as we go through. And we're going to come back to these groupings in a little bit when we show how the budget is spent by key priority area. All right, as I mentioned earlier, one of the key variables that we need to consider is the direction the town staff receives from the mayor on the budget and the budget process. So earlier this year, the mayor provided direction to guide in building the staff-prepared draft budget. There were 5 key parts to the directive as it relates to the 2024 budget, and these are displayed on the screen. And I'll go through them each in a little bit of detail. The first is a direction that we continue to use that PB2 budgeting that I mentioned earlier, and arrive at an overall increase of 4.5%. The second was a directive to OPL for their budget submission. As a separate legal entity, the budget process is a little unique for the library, and providing them a specific direction makes it a bit easier for their board and senior management team to have a target to aim for as they look at their budget. Thirdly, the mayor directed staff to take a long-term view for financial sustainability and the use of the capital levy. The focus on ensuring long-term financial sustainability is aligned with council's strategic priorities that we touched on a few slides ago. The capital levy refers to one of the key funding sources that we have within our budget structure here at the town, and I'll touch on that a little bit more in a few slides. The fourth directive was to ensure that our services remain as they are and that our fee recoveries are in line with our policy. And finally, the last directive for the 2024 budget speaks to the importance of public consultation throughout the process. And we saw that on the flow chart earlier. One final variable that I always like to remind council about that we need to consider here at the town is that we are a lower tier municipality. The town share of the overall tax levy is about 43%, with the region and the province making up the remainder. So this means that any changes that the town may have will have an impact, this means that any changes that they may have will have an impact on the overall tax levy, and that's something we need to think about as well. All right, so that's our process. Now I'd like to switch gears a little bit and talk about the operating budget itself. So in taking a look at the overall budget before diving into specifically into the operating section, we have listed here the $593 million investment that we are proposing to make next year in the town of Oakville for ongoing services and for capital projects. The operating budget is for $405 million, and the capital budget is $188 million. And as we move to the next slide, you'll see how this is broken down into the strategic priorities set by council. And that's right here. So if you think back to that slide I had earlier where we had those different captions at the top, we have the same captions here of growth management, community belonging, environmental sustainability, and accountable government. And the numbers under each of these key areas reflect the planned investments that the town is making in that category in this year's budget. We do this for both our operating investments in that first row and for capital investments in our second row. And then we also show the total investment by category and then add a fourth line for the net tax levy impact. And you'll notice that the net tax levy impact is a much smaller amount than the gross investment, as the gross investment includes items that are funded by other means other than the tax levy, including user fees, reserves, grants, etc. In the commissioner presentations later today and this week, you'll hear much more about the many programs and initiatives under each of these key focus areas. However, I'd like to take a minute to highlight a couple of key budget items in each area for you. So under growth management, our investments there include funds for the construction of Fire Station number 9 in North Oakville and funds for the design and construction of a snow storage facility. Community belonging includes funds for the purchase of land for a future Trafalgar Corridor North library, funds for traffic calming and road safety, and funds for the replacement of various facility and equipment items. Under environmental sustainability, key focus areas are investments for parkland acquisition, transit, electric vehicles, and stormwater infrastructure improvements. And finally, accountable government. Many of these investments are for the behind-the-scenes work that happens here at the town, but this is where we have also included the $5 million for the next steps on the Downtown Cultural Hub Plan. So before I leave this slide, I do want to touch on a couple of reminders for everybody. For one, this chart, at least the operating portion, will not match the totals from the prior slide as we've removed the corporate items as they don't naturally fit into any of these categories. And I do have a separate slide on those items as well. The second thing is that some projects fit in more than one category, but for simplicity, we've only included them in one category here. And then finally, this chart can be found in the executive summary of the budget book, and then the subsequent pages after that also break out some more of the key initiatives in each key focus area. I just grabbed a couple to show you for today's purposes. All right, so tax levy impact. So I'm going to start with a high-level summary of the impacts for our residents and taxpayers, and then move into some more details on the specific drivers for this year's budget. The total tax levy as proposed in the budget is $260 million, and this represents a nearly $21 million increase overall, and a $16 million increase after adjusting for growth, as compared to the figures from last year's budget. On a percentage increase for existing residents, the town share is a 6.54% increase, and as part of the entire tax bill after adding in the region and the education portions, this works out to a 4.28% increase. Now, for those of you with eagle eyes, you might notice that those numbers are actually slightly better than what is actually in the printed budget books, either online or in front of you this morning. After we printed the budget book, we actually received an updated growth figure from MPAC, moving our growth from 1.57% to 2.09%. So incorporating that extra growth into our 2024 budget moves the overall increase to existing residents down to 4.28% instead of 4.5%. So the charts that you'll see on the remaining slides that I'm presenting to you today do incorporate this updated growth figure. We've updated them for that because we want to give you the most accurate snapshot as possible. And then once the budget is finalized, we'll make sure that all the charts in the actual budget book, the digital version of it, will reflect the updated growth figures. All right, now we're going to spend some time going through our key budget drivers slide. So this chart can be found in our budget book, and it has a lot of information in it, and it takes a bit to go through, but I do think it's an important chart to help capture what our key drivers are, and I'll walk you through each of those as we go through the 2024 operating budget. So before I jump into that, I just want to highlight the columns across the top because there is a lot of stuff on this slide. So the first column is the budget drivers themselves, the things that impact the budget. I'm going to skip the second column and go to the third one. That column has the increase in actual dollars and millions. The fourth column has the percent change in the town's tax levy, followed by the percent change in the tax bill itself. The last column is what the impact means for $100,000 of assessment, and this is to help residents gain an understanding of what this budget would mean to their property. And then at the bottom, in the bottom left area, you'll see the second column actually splits out that town regional education portion that I talked about earlier. So I'm going to go through each of these for you, starting with inflation. So this line reflects changes to the existing base that provide for the same level of service as in the previous year. So the largest driver is for personnel increases for our labor costs. In addition, here is where we have the impact for rising costs of materials, supplies, and services for our operations. This line also includes increases to our equipment reserve transfers that we've added this year to address the inflation on the cost of vehicles and equipment and the impact this has on our reserves. Finally, changes in revenue from increasing user fees in line with our user fee policy are also included in this line. The next line is capital and growth impacts. And this category captures the operating impacts of new growth and new capital projects. This is a routine driver, though the amount depends on the nature of the projects and growth, and you'll see that actually in our next slide. So we'll take a little break from the budget driver slide to talk about some of the capital and growth impact items. We've broken them out into 3 different categories here. So each year as we go through the budget process, we also identify any increased costs related to growth or to bring new capital projects into operations. And as you can see in the chart here, of the $6.9 million increase for this category, most of that is related to the operating impacts of a variety of capital projects. For 2024, $4.6 million of these costs are for transit, to include the operating costs for the new charging infrastructure, as well as the increased reserve transfers for switching to electric buses. The other 2 impacts are much smaller. One is for the operating and maintenance impacts of serving a growth community. So these examples, when we add new parks, we have to have more staff and equipment to cut the grass in those parks. That's the next line. And then the third one is for maintaining service levels across the town. These are more indirect than adding new roads or parks, and they're generally back office type services that increase over time. These types of requests are brought forward to our executive leadership team for consideration and approved as part of the budget process. And the commissioners will speak more to some of these additions in their presentations. So if we go back to our budget driver chart here, the next row up is service enhancements. So this line reflects additional or increased levels of service in the town's programs. Similar to the growth impacts, I've got a little chart to show you the details on this. So the net impact to the tax levy for these items is $1.29 million, though there are a number of different items included here, and some are fully or partially funded by user fees, which is why some of the dollars look quite low given the number of FTEs reflected here. Before I give a brief summary of each item, it's important to remember that these initiatives help to address some key gaps that have been identified by both council and staff. This is not an easy process for us to go through each year, as not every new request can be added into the budget and various requests need to be prioritized. So the first category is for the impacts of legislative changes. 6 positions have been added through the Community Development and Infrastructure Commissions to address the ongoing legislative changes outlined in the staff report from September 6th. Commissioners Garby and Fu will have more information on this in their presentations. The second category is to add resources to better support the organization in moving forward at a strategic level, and Director Clark will touch more on this in her presentation. The third category is a mix of positions that will help the town address some key initiatives, including security, both physical and digital. And finally, the last 2 categories are to address some specific program-related services in parking and building, and Commissioner Garby will be referring to these. All right, so now we're back to our budget driver chart, and the next item up is the annualization of 2023 items. So the increase in this line is almost entirely related to the full year implementation of free transit for youth and seniors. In 2023, when council approved this change to transit fares, it only applied to 8 months of the year, beginning in May, and of those 8 months, 50% was covered by tax stabilization funding. For 2024, this tax stabilization funding has been removed, and the full 12 months are now reflected in the budget. Prior year's assessment growth. So this is a driver we don't necessarily have each year, and you'll see there's nothing in there for this year, but I do want to touch on it. In 2017, the town started a practice to align assessment growth recognized in the budget with the actual impacts of growth in an effort to avoid significant swings in our tax levy. What that means is that in years where the town has assessment growth in excess of what is required for funding the impacts of growth in that year, these unused funds are transferred to our tax stabilization reserve until they're required. Likewise, in years where the operating costs of growth are higher, we can use some of those funds to pay for these costs. So we're not using any prior year assessment growth in 2024. However, when I get to the forecast for the next couple of years, you'll see that we do expect to use some in 2025 when we open the new community center at 16 Mile. Our capital levy. The town has a long-standing practice of taking 1% of the prior year's total tax levy amount and adding that to our capital envelope. This is a very valuable tool that allows us to finance the various capital projects that we undertake. This funding source becomes even more important as we continue to refine our asset management plan and look to our future infrastructure needs. All right, now we will move into the two remaining COVID impacts that are the two rows in yellow on this chart. So coming out of the pandemic, ridership in transit has not yet recovered to pre-pandemic levels. So as a result, we have been quantifying the expected loss in ridership each year and then funding that loss in revenue from our tax stabilization reserve so as not to burden Oakville residents with a temporary blip in lost transit fee revenue. In our 2023 budget, the expected loss in ridership revenue was $3.21 million. The good news for 2024 is that ridership is recovering very well, and therefore we are removing just over $2 million of this impact, leaving just over $1 million left in missing revenue in our budget, which is funded by tax stabilization. The hope is that ridership will continue to recover and that we'll be able to remove this tax stabilization funding in the future. I also want to point out here that the adjustments in this row remove the impact of the change in transit fares for youth and seniors, so we're not subsidizing those lost fares with tax stabilization funds as well. And Commissioner Fu will speak more to this in her presentation. All right, so that brings us to the total operating budget impact before growth of $20.7 million, or 8.63%. So that number is reduced, however, due to the assessment growth that we have added for this year. So assessment growth reflects the additional properties being added to the roll, which were not included in the prior year's budget. This is a regular budget driver that we have, though the amount of growth does fluctuate. And this year's assessment growth is over $5 million. As I stated earlier, this is a very fresh number from MPAC, and this is the reason why the totals will differ slightly between my presentation and what you see in front of you in the budget book. So that's the end of our budget drivers. As it stands now, before any other adjustments, the overall tax increase to existing residents is $15.68 million, or 6.54% of the town's tax levy. And when you add in the regional and education portions, this brings the total increase to 4.28%, which works out to $32.54 per $100,000 of assessment. So I thought I would show this impact in a couple of other ways. So one is this pyramid chart that we have in our budget book. So it shows the program increase before assessment growth at the bottom of 8.63%. And then after we add in our assessment growth, the town's increase to existing residents is 6.54%. And then once you add in the region and provincial expected budget impacts, the increase comes in at 4.28%. So another way to illustrate this is to break the operating budget down into if there was $100 worth of taxes. And again, this is something that is in our budget book. And you can see that infrastructure renewal has the largest share at almost 23%, or $23 out of $100, followed by emergency services, Oakville Transit, and the road network. And these amounts are quite consistent on a year-over-year basis. All right, efficiencies and improvements. So one of the key items that we are always looking for as staff is for ways to make the organization more efficient. And I know that this is an important objective of council as well, as we have talked about it each year during my time leading the budget process, and the mayor included it in his directives to staff for the budget. And this year is no different. However, how it looks in our budget process is different. In the past number of years, we've found some savings in our facility operations and in our organizational structure, but we've captured all of those savings. To use a couple of different analogies, There is now no more low-hanging fruit for us to grab, or the towel we've been wringing is now dry. So in the presentations from the commissioners, you won't see a chart with where we've removed funds from the budget for specific initiatives. Now, that doesn't mean we stop looking for efficiencies. It just means that how we find them and how they'll look will be different, as efficiencies can come in many different forms. Some of the initiatives included in this draft budget are to invest in the town for the long run. It's shifting our focus to look at the fundamental ways we deliver service. That work that we'll be doing is looking at our processes and generating outcomes that drive good customer service, and that will be creating capacity for the future. As an example, beginning already last year, Council invested funds in lean methodology to address some of our internal processes. As this work continues, it won't generate specific savings out of the budget. However, it will allow us to do things like clarifying expectations, reducing risk, cost avoidance, providing capacity to take on more, which is really important as we are a growing municipality with a diversity of expectations. And it will help us develop resiliency in our organization. As you hear each of the commissioners speak in their presentations, they'll be able to touch on some of the specific examples of where we are looking at processes in our programs and services to ensure that they are aligned with our objectives and priorities. So this morning, I thought I would share a few words on corporate expenses and revenues today, as I know this is a topic of interest to the Budget Committee. I'm not going to say too much about the expenses, as the category names and details are pretty self-explanatory. However, I would like to point out a couple of things. On the payments and grants, much of this number is for our debt charges, about $7.8 million of that number. And similar to the interest earnings that I'll talk about in a minute, all of our debt charges are recorded through our corporate revenues and expenses. This means that the debt charges here are listed as an expense. However, any non-tax funding for this debt, like DC charges, for example, they'll come through on the revenues, which you'll see on the next slide. Secondly, on the internal expenses and transfers, this line is used primarily for our transfers to reserves. So included in here, we've got $44 million for the capital levy, $14 million for our capital reserve, and over $27 million for interest earnings, and there's more than that, but those are the big ones. So if we move to the next slide, I've got the corporate revenues listed here. And again, I'm not going to touch on each one, but I did want to point out a couple of key things. So first, I'd like to point out that some of these amounts have changed from previous years. As the town is growing, we are seeing higher supplementary taxes and, unsurprisingly, more revenue and penalties and interest. So we've increased the budget on both of these lines. Interest income is another one that has gone up as interest rates have increased significantly. The amount listed here is for all of the town's expected interest. Most of this goes back to our reserves and reserve funds, and that's done through the transfer that I mentioned on the previous slide. Fund transfers, which is the second last non-bolded one, that refers to any funds that we take from our reserves for specific purposes. So if you think back to my comment on the DC debt a moment ago, this is where you would see the funds coming in from the DC reserves to pay for those debt charges. So once you net the revenues and expenses, you'll see that the net impact on the tax levy is a cost of just over $30 million. Considering that our capital levy alone is over $40 million, this means that the various corporate revenue sources are offsetting the corporate expenses and making a dent into the capital levy requirement for our taxpayers. And before I leave this slide, I'd also like to point out that we've modified our presentation of the corporate revenues and expenses in the budget book based on some of the feedback that we received last year. All right, so I've spent a lot of time talking about the operating budget. I have one slide on the operating forecast. So this is for 25 and 26. And so while we're only considering the budget for approval for this year, it is important that we look ahead to the future. This chart, which is also found in our budget book, is similar to our 2024 budget driver chart, but has a few differences. Across the top, this chart shows the forecasted impact on the town's tax levy and the tax bill itself, and we do this for both 25 and for 26. So as you can see, the inflationary impacts are expected to be much lower than for 2024, and this is in keeping with the Bank of Canada's long-term expectations. As we continue to see what Canadian and global inflation patterns are, we'll keep Council apprised of any changes to these rates. It's also important to point out that some of the capital and growth impacts in 2025 will be related to the operating costs of opening the new 16-mile community center. So as a result, we are expecting to bring in that prior year's assessment growth that I was talking about earlier, and that's to help reduce the impact on the tax levy. All right, so that's it for the operating budget, and we're going to switch gears to the capital budget now. All right, so our 2024 capital budget has a number of key initiatives and projects that total to $187.9 million. And you can see that figure broken down here into the three categories that we use to organize the town's capital budget. So I'll go through each of these captions here and touch on a couple of the key items. However, more details can be found in the budget book and will be touched on by the commissioners in their presentations. So under growth of $77 million, we've got $14 million for Fire Station 9, $3.5 million for North Service Road urbanization, $5 million for a snow disposal site in the north, $5 million for land for a future OPL branch down Trafalgar, $12 million for various park development works, and $21.5 for parkland acquisition. For infrastructure renewal of $83 million, that includes $9 million for our road resurfacing program, $14 million for electric replacement buses, $4 million for the Glen Abbey Blue Rink pad, $6 million for various park renewal projects, and over $3 million for various fleet requirements. And then our last category is program initiatives, which are for strategic projects that are not related to growth or infrastructure renewal. And this year's budget has $27.6 million in projects, including $5.4 million for the Downtown Cultural Hub, $2.2 million for Wallace Park, and $4.3 million for transit for the capital lease on the charging infrastructure. So to help visualize where some of the key projects are for 2024, this chart breaks out the program areas with the largest capital spending. You can see them across the bottom there. I'm not going to go into too much detail here, as the commissioners will touch on some of the more significant initiatives in their presentations, but I do think it provides a clear representation as to which program areas have the bulk of our capital spending. And while the previous slide had what the costs were, this slide shows what the spending, what the funding for it is. And this shows where we get the funds to pay for those projects. So as you can see, the capital levy and our capital reserves are our largest funding sources for this year's capital budget. Given that infrastructure renewal and program initiatives total over $100 million, this is to be expected. Development charges, the CBC and Parkland are also significant funding sources this year. And please keep in mind that our use of the growth funding tools fluctuates year by year, depending on the projects included in the budget. For example, last year we actually did not have the need for any Parkland funds in our budget, whereas this year it includes over $20 million from that source. So that's our capital budget in a quick nutshell, but I'd also like to spend some time talking about our 10-year capital forecast. And this lists all of our projects from 2024 all the way to 2033. So similar to the capital budget, I've broken them down by the key areas that we use in our budget, and there's $2.2 billion in total for our 10-year capital forecast. So growth costs of $1.1 billion includes funds for new parks and parkland acquisitions, Fire Station number 4, future rec centers and libraries, work at the North Ops Depot, new electric buses, and road and active transportation projects. Infrastructure renewal of $863 million includes funds for various vehicle and equipment replacements, road resurfacing, various facilities, park renewals, roads, bridges, storm sewers, creek works, as well as IT projects. And finally, program initiatives of $186 million includes funds for the library portion of the Downtown Cultural Hub refresh, various corporate initiatives, invasive species control, traffic calming, and the capital lease for bus electrification equipment. And so very similar to the slide I showed you for the 2024 capital budget, except now the figures are for the 10-year forecast. I've listed the key departments here. I've also included some colors in here to represent the different types of projects. So you'll see growth is in the darker blue, infrastructure in the medium blue, and program initiatives in the lighter blue. And you can see these are the programs that have a significant impact on growth and infrastructure renewal. And as we continue to refine our asset management plan, our financial strategies for these infrastructure items will become more robust. So I have included this slide to highlight a couple of things for the committee. So for one, the numbers are quite significant as they represent over $2 billion in expected costs over the next 10 years. The other is that we need to talk about two of our key funding sources. So one is the growth funding tools, and the other is our reserves, specifically our capital reserve, and I have a couple slides on each of these. So if we go to growth funding tools first. So the reserve report on today's agenda does an excellent job describing the three primary tools: development charges, community benefits charges, or the CBC, and parkland dedication. So I'm not going to go into too much detail on them, but I did want to focus on a couple of things. So for one, with growth, it's important to remember the big picture. The town often collects DCs at a different time than they are used. This chart, which is coming from that reserve report, highlights that quite well. These are our DC balances over the past 10 plus years in blue, with a projection for the next 10 years, which is that dotted red line. As you can see, they do fluctuate depending on collections for developments that are being built and which projects that we are using the funds for. So this second chart is a combination chart that shows both our forecasted DC spending and our projected balances. So the blue bars represent the expected spending in each year of the 10-year capital forecast, with the small red cap on each representing the debt financing for that year. The big gray bar represents the projects that Council has already approved that is currently unspent but is committed to projects. The light blue background shows the projected balance for each year and matches the red line that you saw in the previous chart. All right, now I've shown you our DC balances, and they do remain positive as a whole. Some do go negative individually, but as a group, they remain positive over the 10-year forecast. However, having said that, there remains uncertainty and significant risk to DC revenue due to pending regulations from Bill 23. The revenue we have built into our forecast has taken into consideration the new DC bylaw phase-in of our rates, as well as the Bill 108 rate freeze, which as of August have reached 10.5 million in lower revenue. I have on screen here the chart that we provide to Council each month to highlight the lost revenue from these changes. There are potentially more impacts to come from pending regulations that will define affordable and attainable residential units, as well as ineligible land and capital costs. Affordable and attainable units are to be exempt from DCs, and draft regulations have recently been released by the province for comment. The magnitude of these exemptions may be significant and, depending on how the province plans to keep municipalities whole, could result in a significant impact to DC collections used to pay for growth-related projects. So to help address these concerns, staff have taken a cautious and conservative approach in the preparation of the 2024 forecast. The most significant impact is with respect to the timing of a number of projects. They have been adjusted based on these concerns as it relates to our DC revenue and balances. We've done this for a number of parks and roads projects, including in Midtown, but perhaps the best example is in Palermo. We have a number of projects slated for this part of town for a community center, a library, and a transit terminal, and we have pushed these out in our forecast for a few extra years. I also wanted to use this opportunity to address some of the questions that came in from the budget consultations from the councillors. The commissioners will address most of those questions in their presentations, but there were some that were best addressed through the overview presentation today. So one question asked about any budget impacts from 24 and 25 related to the reduction in DCs, and another asked that any costs that the town incurs regarding development as a result of Bill 23 and Bill 109 be communicated to taxpayers. At this point in time, there are no direct costs the town has incurred. Rather, the town's revenue collected has been reduced, which is requiring us to make decisions about the priority and timing of projects. Another question was asked about adding a line to the tax bill should funding from the province not be provided, so as to make the public aware of the costs. In response to this request, there are a couple of things that I can share with the committee and with our residents. For one, we have not yet heard from the province how they will make us whole, so we'll have to wait on that part. Secondly, there are no costs yet, as per the previous answer. And finally, should we end up in a situation where we do have increased costs and council wishes to show those on the tax bills, then we would need to be very specific about doing this in a way that follows the legislation that governs tax bills. The town can only put something on the tax bill that has been specifically levied for. It can't just be a portion of our budget. Should we end up in this situation, this is something that we would work with council on. All right, so that was our growth funding tools. I'd also like to talk about our other key funding source, and that is our own discretionary reserves and reserve funds. So I've listed the major categories on the chart here, showing both the 2023 projected balances in the darker blue and the 2024 projected balances in the lighter blue. And I won't spend too much time on this slide, as the accompanying reserve report outlines more details about each of these reserve categories. And as you can see here, the stabilization and capital reserves are quite healthy this year and even into next year. But I would like to spend some time talking about our capital reserves specifically. So the capital reserve is one of the town's largest funding sources for the program initiatives and for much of our infrastructure renewal work. The reserve is increased each year with reserve transfers and our capital levy, and is often supported by proceeds from land sales. Currently, the capital reserve balance is in a strong position, with a 2023 ending balance projected at $138 million. However, over the next 10 years, the balance is forecasted to decrease rapidly, and if this is not mitigated, it is projected to head into a negative position with a low of negative $71 million in 2031. We do not actually plan on allowing this reserve to become negative, and lots can change over the course of a 10-year forecast, but this speaks to the fact that decisions will need to be made to address this. The reserve report that we've included on today's agenda contains more commentary on this, but there are a number of items leading us to this position, including asset management. So asset management plays such an important role in our capital planning. We are well along our asset management journey and continue to work towards meeting all of the provincial regulations, which requires the inclusion of all of our assets in our asset management plan and having a financing plan for them. As we continue to do this work, we identify more projects that need to be added to our forecast. And while that does have an impact on our forecasted balance, it is helping to highlight for us what critical work will need to be done in the next 10 years so that we as an organization can make the best decisions possible as to how to most effectively use our resources and to consider the service levels at which we should be operating. Catherine Hewitson and the asset management team work closely with finance in preparing the capital forecast, and they also have a report on today's agenda that includes more information that the committee may find helpful. So the second sub-bullet I have under factors is stormwater. So tied very closely into our asset management needs are those we need to address our stormwater infrastructure. As seen recently in the rainwater management reports that have been brought to council, there are a lot of needs in this area and that the town will need to address. Climate change. The town has invested and continues to plan to invest in some significant areas to address climate change, including our transit electrification and net zero buildings. These investments are more expensive and require funding. Inflation. As you've seen in our quarterly reports, the costs for all types of instruction are rising rapidly, and this is putting pressure on our capital reserve, and you've seen that in our equipment reserves as well. And finally, new initiatives. So new initiatives like the Downtown Cultural Hub add new items to the forecast and impact the forecasted balance. So it's a little bit of a somber story about our forecast, but I do want to assure you that this is a 10-year forecast and our reserves are currently healthy. We do have time to address these concerns, and I've listed a few options on the slide here, and they are also considered in that reserve report. So the first one is other sources of revenues. So this could include support from other levels of government in the way of grant funding, like we are currently pursuing for our transit electrification. Or there is the consideration of a stormwater fee, and I'll touch on that one more in a moment. The next line is about taxation. The capital levy is a very valuable source of funding for the town, and I would encourage council to continue to add the 1% levy in each year's budget. Deferral or removal of certain projects. So the first two options are on the revenue side of the ledger, and this one is on the expense side. Deferring cost to future years or reducing the costs, either on the number of projects or on their scope, are ways that can also address these concerns. And these are all things that I would encourage council to keep in the back of their mind as they review the budget and consider decisions in the upcoming years. So I do have one graph that shows this, that helps to highlight both the concerns related to the forecasted balance in the reserve and also what can be done to help mitigate it. So this chart shows the forecasted balance in our capital reserve. That's the blue line, and that's based on our 10-year capital reserve forecast. However, if we were to add this red line in, this represents if we took out our stormwater projects, if we remove them from the 10-year capital forecast. So if we were to fund these projects another way, like through a separate fee or levy or something like that, it would alleviate a good deal of the pressure on our capital reserve. So one more thing I'd like to touch on as it relates to our reserves, or specifically to our capital reserve, is the impact that the projected balances have on our debt to reserve ratio. So the debt to reserve ratio is just that. It's a reflection of our debt levels compared to our reserve balances. And so our policy is to keep this relationship below 1-to-1 to help the region of Halton maintain their very high credit rating. And as you can see in the chart here, this ratio does exceed that target throughout our forecast, though it does return below 1-to-1 towards the end of the forecast. And this is something we'll need to keep an eye on as we consider our reserve and debt levels and make choices accordingly about projects and spending. And so while this ratio is something we do need to keep an eye on, it is important also that we touch on our debt levels, and that's a more positive story. So as you're well aware, debt is a funding tool that we can use here at the town. And one of the comments from the public consultation referenced concern over increased debt levels. All municipalities have limits on their debt levels. Those are set by the ministry. And the town also has further internal limits on our debt capacity. So this is for tax-supported debt, for total corporate debt, and for DC debt, as you see on the slide here. And this is done to make sure that our debt levels remain appropriate and don't overburden us. So the chart you see in front of you also in our budget book includes our projected debt levels for the 10-year forecast, and you can see that we are well within our limits. So if you want to take a further look in the budget book, there will be a little bit more detail as well. All right, so if we go wrap up our capital forecast and our reserves and debt conversation, we're going to move on to our last topic, which is rates and fees. All right, so each year as part of the annual budget process, rates and fees are reviewed by departments to ensure that they reflect the cost of delivering services, and this is in keeping with our policy. As a reminder, whenever fees do not fully cover the cost of a program, that difference is borne by the tax levy. The direction issued by the mayor was that staff look to keep our fees in line with our user fee policy to ensure that the cost recovery rates are appropriate. Included in today's agenda is the staff report, which includes more information about the rates and fees and has an appendix outlining all of the specific rates and fees to be considered for approval. These fees are posted on our website to allow the public time to review them. We've also placed a notice in the Oakville Beaver's website advertising today's meeting. And the staff prepared draft budget includes the revenues associated with these proposed fees. And as the rates and fees are approved by council, they will need to be approved by council at the conclusion of the budget process. So given the new strong mayor powers, this process may look a little different this year. However, staff will provide council with the wording for a motion at the appropriate time to approve the rates and fees for 2024. And so that brings me to the end of my presentation. I did want to leave a few key takeaways for council. First, the 2024 operating budget as presented by staff is coming in at 4.28%, which is under the 4.5% as directed by the mayor and contains key investments and programs to deliver services to residents and to support the organization. The 2024 capital budget contains some important capital projects, both for growth and infrastructure renewal, and our reserves are currently healthy to pay for these projects. The 10-year forecast has a lot of projects and some concerns about paying for them all, especially as it relates to the town's capital reserve. Decisions will need to be made by council to address these concerns. And then I'd like to touch on the budget books for a minute. I think I see most of you have your budget books already. If you don't, they are available in your mail slots. And there's also a digital version on our website for the public to see. And before I wrap up, I did want to extend some thanks to all those who have played a role in getting us where we are today. As Jane said when she started, there is a lot of work that goes into this process. I know that all of our departments put a ton of effort into submitting their budgets in a way that balances concerns over increases with the operational needs of those programs. I'd also like to say thank you to our executive leadership team for their guidance as we navigate through this process. This year had changed processes and timelines, and I know they came in on vacation sometimes to make that happen, so we're grateful for that. And then I'd also like to thank my finance team, Dalabar, Matt, and the whole group. They're a great group. They put a lot of effort into this every year. Even more so this year, we're here a month earlier than normal, so I'm very grateful to them to be able to put a budget book in front of you today, so thank you to them as well. With that, Councillor O'Meara, it's back to you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Van der Heyden. I did want to make a note that Councillor Lischenna is on the meeting here, and I apologize for missing her at the beginning. I think we have a question here from Councillor Elgar.
Thank you. Through you, Chair. Jonathan, your report on reserves and reserve fund outlook is one of the best reports I've ever read in over 20-some years. But going forward, before this process is over, will you be able to provide a lot more summary detail of the impact that the province will have, or will we know by then, on the development charges section, the community benefits charges impact, and the parkland dedication impact. You've done an excellent job of framing it, but there's a lot of, it really raises a lot of questions of how much the taxpayer is going to be on the hook if, in fact, the province does not make us whole. And I know Councillor Duddick has spelled out whole a whole different way than the way that we think, but I just wonder, like, you've got so much information in here that the public has to know this, because we have to make sure they are engaged with our provincial representatives also.
Through you, Chair O'Meara. So a couple of comments there. First of all, thanks for your compliment on the report. I think I'd pass it on to Matt and his team. They're the ones who built that report. And there's a lot of great detail in there. In response to the question about the impact the provincial changes could have on us, I think, and it pains me to say I don't have an answer for you now, but this is the sort of thing we need to learn more about, how they're going to define affordable and attainable housing, what that means for us, what they'll do with land costs, and then we need to figure out what those impacts are, and then take a look at our 10-year forecast and say, okay, knowing that, what do we have to do to address that? Whether that is funding them from our own sources, whether that is pushing out projects, some combination of that, or something else. I don't have a great answer for you now, but it's something that is top of mind for us, and we'll be sure to let you know as we learn more information about this process.
So, Jonathan, the 10.9 million currently related to development charges, is that just as of right now, how much we've lost?
Through you, Chair O'Meara, that is as of, I think that was from the September CAO update, so, I mean, as close as we can get to reporting for you right now, yes.
And that's the one, that's the first one, and that's nothing compared to the community benefit charge impact potentially, and also the parkland dedication impact potentially, where we're going to lose 65 to 70% of 109 million. So we're losing between 65 and 75 million if they don't make us whole. Like, that's what, this is a great report, I got to tell you. We just got to get it out to the public in very simple language of what that would impact on their tax rate every year. So I don't know, hopefully we can get that done before the budget's put to bed, but do you think the legislation will be in place by then?
Through you, Chair O'Meara. So the definition on attainable and affordable housing is out right now for comment. I think it has a couple more weeks on it, but I don't know the steps after that. I'm sorry, I don't know if anyone else to know. Don't have a better
anyway,
answer for
you can only do what you can, but it's an amazing report. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Adams.
Thanks very much. I'm just looking at pages 13, 14 of our agenda, which I lost track of which slide it was, but it's the Stormwater Management Capital Reserve project balance slide that you had. And it really highlights significantly how important the stormwater management fee is going to be for our budgeting and for the health of our finances in the town over the long term. And so I got to ask, what do we need to do to make sure that that comes forward as soon as possible? Because the sooner we get it in place, the stronger our finance will be over the long term. So are we in a position to be able to move that forward a year?
Through Chair O'Meara, I think Commissioner Fu will talk about some of that in her presentation. So I can either call her up now if you'd like, Chair O'Meara, or we can wait for her presentation because she'll address that.
If there's more about the rainwater management strategy in her presentation, then I'm happy to wait for that. But I think that's an important conversation for us to have.
Sounds great. Thank you, Councillor Adams. Councillor Elgar, are you around too? Or okay, we're all good. Councillor Hazathiel.
Thank you, Chair O'Meara. Is there a possibility of showing us when we achieve the mandated provincial growth, what the assessment growth, the estimated assessment growth impact would be by 2031?
Ooh. Through you, Chair O'Meara, that's a good question. I'd have to think about that and how we would do that. It would have to be very high level. And we have to know the types of units that we'd be getting, and we'd have to use a lot of assumptions. I suppose we could, but that would take a bit of an exercise.
So I think we have a projection on the types of units, and
never would suggest that I want to stump you, Jonathan, because your team is brilliant. But it is a core factor in our financial health and sustainability. And even if it's a high-level estimate, that when we see the reserves coming down, when we see the DCs coming down, how is that offset by some assessment growth? If it's possible, great. If it's not, at some point, if you could just report back to let us know what is possible, that'd be great. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor. Any other questions? Thank you very much, Mr. Van der Heyden, for the lengthy and detailed presentation. I believe we have Ms. Clark is going to come up for a presentation on the CAO's office right now. Over to you.
Good morning, everyone. So I'll be walking you through the Office of the CAO budget, which has two program areas. The Administrative Executive Leadership includes the Office of the CAO and the 4 commissions, and the Strategy, Policy, and Communications Department, which looks to advance corporate priorities, engage the community, and enhance the customer experience. This is showing our overall portion of the budget. You're starting with the smallest group first. And the areas that we support through Council's strategic plan are accountable government primarily, and we also have a portion devoted to environmental sustainability. Before we look ahead to 2024, I did want to touch on a few accomplishments for this year. Our websites were successfully relaunched. We've received 3 awards on website excellence, and we've been very pleased with the user feedback received to date on that. We facilitated Council's long-term strategy and 4-year action plan. Our draft Inclusion, Diversity, Equity, and Accessibility Plan, which is being developed in partnership with the Canadian Centre for Diversity and Inclusion, will be presented to Council by the end of this year. For climate action, we've made gains on our resiliency action plans and outreach and education through Oakville Ready, and we completed a gap analysis for the implementation of the Task Force for Climate-Related Financial Disclosure. Now, just a reminder on what the Task Force framework is all about. It's about accountability and understanding the impact that an organization has on the climate. It will allow citizens to better understand how we are managing the risks and opportunities of climate change, and allows us to compare our progress and learn from others. Looking at our key program outcomes, after several years of a downward trend, we have rebounded on our Service Oakville metric of number of calls answered within 30 seconds. We've come back to above target on that at 83%. We've also introduced a few new measures this year since the website's now been rebuilt and relaunched to better take a look at those, how that is performing. For climate action, while we won't have 2023 results until the new year, we have shown the 2022 results. I will note the middle 2 years, of course, are the pandemic impacts. And these results reflect our revised target. So we came to Council last year. We used to have a benchmark of the 2014 year. We changed that to 2015. It is a harder target to reach now because it no longer includes the last of the coal-fired gas plants. And this is showing our progress. I did want to note our facilities and our construction management team lead the progress against these targets in the organization, and they've been working really hard to make gains, even as we've introduced new facilities. We do remain confident that the corporate energy use, that we will meet that. However, we may need additional time to meet the greenhouse gas emissions target. However, Commissioner Bell, in her presentation, will be sharing the next round of energy efficiencies that are going to be introduced, which will directly support our movement in this against this target. So looking at our gross operating budget between the two areas and then the tax levy, there is an increase year over year. These are increases related to staff to address existing gaps for the website, some intergovernmental relations, and some continuous improvement work. And I will get into that over the next few slides. So each of the presentations that you're going to hear this week includes something that we're calling the watch list. And there are several issues that we're keeping an eye on, and these feed directly into our 2024 budget and work plan. John mentioned long-term financial sustainability throughout his presentation, and other levels of government, of course, impact that sustainability. The province continues to adjust the municipal landscape. Climate action responses require federal and provincial direction setting and funding support. We are monitoring the federal party positions regarding municipalities. And funding, it's a significant pressure, and town advocacy is key as we work with other levels of government to help offset that impact. Climate change is an area that's always on the watch list. This year, the upcoming UN conference in December will highlight both direction setting for nations and better practices. We also stay current on various reports. For example, from the province, they released one just a few weeks ago, and the UN Environment Program, as well as actions that other municipalities are taking on better and best practices that can be adopted here as well, and their lessons learned. Data-based decision-making is a challenge. We've had explosive growth in our online services, as well as smart city infrastructure. How we manage this data is key, and organizations are shifting from strong data silos to a true enterprise approach. And this trend is what influenced our decision to adopt an enterprise-wide approach here in our data management plan. And what that means is, no matter what line of business you're dealing with, the data uses the same definition. It's the same source, so that we can communicate across rather than just in strong silos. Customer service expectations remain tied to convenience, personalization, and privacy. Adoption of artificial intelligence is becoming more common. However, lessons learned from other jurisdictions outline the importance of responsible implementation and ensuring that its use truly improves the customer experience and doesn't become a source of frustration. For governments, the need to ensure our traditional channels remain. So while we are moving online, our counters remain a needed channel. And we are very much in a transition period on that. And finally, the town is changing. Our growth, our built form, and our demographic profile. Growth is increasing our service requirements, and how we manage the impact of this growth is core to our continuous improvement work. These town changes are also essential to ensuring variety in our program offerings and ways to strengthen feelings of community belonging. So looking ahead to 2024, I would like to highlight a few things. Our online journey continues. With the completion of our website overhaul, we did a payment standard in a previous year, and our soon-to-be-launched Service Oakville online improvements. I've mentioned before building blocks, and each year we've been working on a number of these building blocks to ensure that we have a faster turnaround for new online services. The final building block is public identity and access management. When it comes to data, we are data rich. we are standards and rules poor. So identifying what the data is, where it is stored, who owns and manages it, how it is secured, and the standards that are applied to the data. That's what data management is about. We have a pilot this year that links to the project I just mentioned, Public Identity and Access Management. It's creating a consistent customer profile standard that everyone will use. And following that, we'll expand into other data sets. The outcome of this work, because it can sound all rather dry, but the outcome of this work is trusted, secure data that can be used in decision-making. For climate action, the town is focused on establishing policy directions, leading by example in our own operations, and assisting our residents in understanding the actions that they can take as well. Overall, the town's budget dedicates $118 million to environmental sustainability, and the commissioners will share several initiatives underway in their presentations, including the introduction of an energy advisor in building services. For the Strategy, Policy, and Communications team, we are focused on the completion of the district energy feasibility study for the hospital lands. We'll be updating and expanding our electric vehicle and equipment plan and policies, and implementing the task force recommendations. I also wanted to note that we were successful in obtaining grant funds from Natural Resources Canada to facilitate heat pump training with our local contractors. We were waiting for that grant approval to come through, so we did get that. And as a reminder, this is a partnership with Burlington and Halton Hills and the Heating, Refrigeration, and Air Conditioning Institute of Canada. So we look forward to doing that next year as well. Also in each of the presentations that you'll see, John mentioned that there's going to be a slide specific to efficiencies. Strategy, policy, and communications. Our role is we're responsible for the tools, the supports, and setting the continuous improvement culture across the organization. We are very much building on our successes and being intentional with our lean reviews. Lean training is targeted to council strategic plan objectives and known pain points for customers and employees. We need to look at all aspects of the organization and drive the outcome of a positive, consistent customer experience. I do want to note that this is difficult work. It's uncomfortable. Our role very much in the department is to stay the course. So we help problem solve. We work through concerns and fears, and we challenge the status quo. John mentioned, and I want to reiterate, efficiencies do come in a variety of forms. Reduced cost, of course, is one. Everyone likes the reduced costs, but there is also the faster service delivery, the easier to follow processes, and cost avoidance. And as a growing municipality, it is important to increase the capacity of staff to take on more work. This year, we have 3 staff taking their black belt training, which is the highest level of lean certification, and they have projects underway on procurement, employee status, as well as property development. And Commissioner Sully will have some preliminary results on her projects that she's going to share in her presentation. We have additional projects that are about to start this month. They include doing reviews of 3 permit processes, our cemetery payments, our onboarding and offboarding, our transit route web updates, and more. And so this work really is about building and maintaining our momentum, showing how and where we are driving efficiencies each year across the organization. So this will be a slide that you will again see next year, which will include the outcomes of the projects that I just identified. So linking back to my earlier comments, for 2024 resource requirements, we have addressed existing gaps through the addition of the following positions. Website editors will address the gap that led to the need to rebuild our website. Keeping our content current and easy to search is a significant undertaking and requires additional staff. To maintain momentum on continuous improvement, a contract position is being converted to a full-time one, focused entirely on the overall lean program, cross-commission projects, and service reviews. The last few years have exposed a gap in our ability to quickly understand and assess the significant changes we are facing on several fronts: legislative changes, provincial reports, municipal comparators, etc. Our intergovernmental priority work will be strengthened by the addition of one permanent and one temporary resource to support both the CAO's office and the commissioners. We are bringing together the similar mandates of corporate communications, Service Oakville, and the web and social media teams under a new Director of Communications and Customer Experience. How we communicate and interact with our citizens and ensure a reliable, accurate, and consistent experience is essential to maintaining trust in town services. And finally, in the earlier slide on key commission initiatives, there was a reference to customer experience and organizational performance improvements. An initiatives and business support team is being established to directly support community and corporate services commissions in lean reviews and to help drive corporate initiatives such as the digital plan and diversity and inclusion. We need capacity to drive change, but when we change things, processes, number of approvals, or even the rules themselves, we need to ensure there isn't a negative impact elsewhere, that there's not a downstream impact to those changes. And this work can't be done in isolation. It requires a certain amount of coordination, prioritization, but also doing, making sure that the changes are getting done. The Community Development Commission already has this support. Community Infrastructure has been able to access that group for some help. And this change will ensure that all commissions have the capacity to drive improvements and efficiencies across all departments. Moving forward to capital. A few projects that I would like to point out. Data management funding will create 2 temporary positions, a manager and a business architect, as well as consulting dollars for solutions architecture to bring much needed expertise into the organization, get the operating model going, and ongoing pilots implemented. There are additional capital dollars for the website to support ongoing maintenance and further improvements to accessibility and usability, and this has been based on user feedback, industry trends, and some website analytics. And after this year, web funding will move into general maintenance and continuous improvement mode. And finally, we are looking to expand our customer relationship management system into other areas of the organization. And this year, we'll bring on the Office of the Mayor and Council. This will help the office manage the various inquiries and interactions with constituents and stakeholders. Not every issue fits within the Service Oakville mandate. There's a number of questions and concerns that are raised that don't fit nicely. And so there's an opportunity to better track responses and ensure an organized approach to handling inquiries received by that office. It will not be the exact same platform that Service Oakville uses, but will allow a certain amount of connection between the two as well. And finally, I did want to note, while the Downtown Cultural Hub is noted under this budget line, Commissioner Bell will be speaking to that project in her presentation. So with that, I would be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you very much. I think you've got one from Councillor Knoll.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Within the gamut of this particular budget piece, it rests all communications, I assume, all
Corporate communications, yes.
So that would be advertising, all that sort of thing. So, I mean, one of the big landscape changes, of course, that's happened in Halton Region, as many other small municipalities in Ontario, is the loss of our only printed newspaper. We already face a situation where constituents are constantly saying, I didn't know about this, I didn't know about that. It was already a challenge. How does the department expect to address this challenge? Will it require additional, because I'm assuming most of this was prepared before that announcement happened, are there additional funds going to be required for some other form of interactive communication with the public? How are you going to address that? Because that's going to be a big sea change in terms of, and it will affect other departments too, like planning and such as well.
Yes, so that's a very timely question. I'll answer it in two parts. We do have an interim solution to that, which we are working through. It does, though, prompt the need for us to update our public engagement procedure, which was also on the work plan that I didn't mention. And so that is taking the opportunity to really assess this issue and how we ensure that the citizen engagement is there. I suspect that as we review that policy and procedure, we will be identifying what we need to really drive that. There are different tools out there that are available that we may choose to come back to council for a request on, but we have to do our homework on that. So we have an interim solution to get us through the immediate change, which came on quite suddenly. And then we do have to plan longer term for the future of public engagement. And this department would be the hub for that.
Can you identify what those interim solutions look like at this point?
So every request, or whenever there is a need to have something posted, we now, legal is doing a review of that to make sure what is actually required so that we meet our obligations. We will post in either the Toronto Star, the Globe and Mail, another type of newspaper if that's deemed necessary, as well as promoting through our social media channels and on our website as well. And through the local online version of Oakville News and the Beaver. So it depends on the circumstance. We are assessing and then choosing the best option to meet the needs.
Posting in Toronto dailies could add a percentage point to our budget.
Mm-hmm. So only when absolutely necessary would we do that.
I'll be very interested to see how that manifests over the next few months and years, because you're right, it's suddenly happened to everybody, and it's going to require some significant jiggery pokery to manage that.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
If I could just add to that, I think the more appropriate change is to have the legislation changed that enables us to be able to do it in a different way. So that's certainly one thing we're moving on as well.
Thank you. Councillor Lashina.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you for that presentation, Julie. Quick question regarding the corporate energy use, the slide that you had, that 2022, 15.4%. Do we know of actual and real dollars, any cost savings? I realize energy prices have also gone up through that time, but do we have any idea, or is it just a wash?
I would have to take that back and talk to the facilities management team on that. I don't have that offhand.
Thank you.
Mayor Burton.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just want to add to the response.
I just want to use my microphone. I'd like to add to the answer, the supplemental answer that the CAO gave, and remind you that we have forwarded a letter to the provincial government asking them for permission to use the British Columbia solution, which is to direct everybody to your website. And whether they change the law or give us permission, one or the other, there is an option out there, and we're pursuing it. And I know that not just Councillor Knoll, but everybody's concerned about this.
Thank you very much, Mayor Burton. Thank you very much, Director Clark. I think that's your time. Thank you. Commissioner Sully, I believe you're up in the line of fire next. Thank you for the presentation there.
Good morning. I am pleased to present the Corporate Services Commission budget. Corporate Services has 5 departments that show up as 6 program areas in the budget document. The mandate of our commission is to strengthen, support, and protect the organization. We're often behind the scenes, supporting the various departments and program areas, but we're also ensuring that we have policies and procedures in place, legislation is complied with, and that we're looking for the interests of the corporation over the long term. We're a small portion of the overall gross operating budget at just 8%, or $35 million. Our net operating budget represents 12% of the overall tax levy, and that's because most of our program areas are personnel as opposed to revenue generating. We primarily support accountable government, both in our operations and in our capital program. And this slide just shows the breakdown of the gross operating and net operating budget for our program areas. The highest piece, or the largest piece of the pie, is our Information Technologies and Solutions program. And that area supports all of the technology and systems that we all use, but it also takes on the cost of software maintenance, software as a service, as operating departments bring on more technology. So those costs are also embedded in that area budget. This shows our 2024 tax levy by program. Most of the increases are caused by inflation. In our Information Technologies and Solutions area, some of that impact of software as a service and software maintenance costs are showing up in there. As we move to more and more cloud-based solutions, it has an impact on our operating budget, not so much on the capital side. I also want to highlight that the 2024 program for corporate services includes some new positions. I will speak to that later on in my presentation. And this slide just shows some of the accomplishments that we've had in 2023. We have been working with the region on the vacant home tax design framework. There will be a report coming forward to Regional Council, likely later this year, although it will be dependent on the provincial framework being released. We are still working through the implementation, how the program would work, the costs and the revenues associated with it. We also introduced a rental housing protection bylaw, demolition control bylaw, which were adopted this year to proactively address and protect future and present residential rental housing properties. And we developed a 5-year cybersecurity risk mitigation strategy. The strategy has 5 main strategic priorities, and that would be governance, strengthening our cybersecurity posture, security and resilience, collaboration, and awareness to ensure that we develop a culture of cybersecurity awareness going forward. We also have been bargaining with our unions this year. A considerable amount of time has been spent on that with 3 of our union groups. And I'll speak more to the bylaw search and findability project in our 2024 initiatives. But this year we completed a review of what was required, and we have some recommendations on how to move forward. We also completed the first cohort of our Aspiring Leaders program. We had 25 participants in this program. We also had a clean audit for 2022, rolled out OMERS for part-time staff that were eligible, and we transitioned council to Office 365 this year, provided technology upgrades in the council chamber, and enhancing our customer service. We have our ITS service counter where we expanded our hours. This slide shows some of the KPIs that can be found in the business plans. These measures are consistent with what we have reported out in the past. However, we are in the process of updating our measures to ensure that we can provide a meaningful picture of the results that are achieved by our programs. And I look forward to the data management work that will assist us as we go forward. We have many things on our watch list. As the town grows and we continue to focus on providing efficient and effective services to our residents, we're seeing more demand internally for support from our corporate services team. Moving forward, it will be critical that we have the resources to support the organization and provide capacity for strategic planning. This includes working with departments to ensure we have workforce plans in place and are building teams with the skills and knowledge required as technology changes and demands for service evolve. We are facing increased competition in the labor market, and we continue to take steps to mitigate these challenges and to ensure that we can recruit qualified candidates. This remains a significant risk for us in the near term at least, and despite having a reputation as an employer of choice, we continue to face challenges attracting talent and ensuring that we can get the skilled employees that we require. We need to ensure we have capacity and human resources to support departments in retention and attraction of staff, and that we have strategies in place to ensure we can recruit the talent and keep the talent that we need. Another area we're focusing on is mental health. We can constantly or consistently promote mental health and well-being in all of our communications to staff. We've also taken some steps to improve access to mental health resources by removing the requirement for doctor's notes, as well as increasing the allowable providers that staff can access. Financial management is a strategic objective under our strat plan. It's a key focus in our commission of long-term financial planning and budgeting, ensuring financial sustainability is maintained and flexibility is built in to meet the future needs over the long term. There's a lot of economic uncertainty, with economic warning signals increasing from high interest rates, inflation, etc. We need to ensure we can nimbly react to fluctuations in the economy and any corresponding impact on demand for our programs and services. We continue to manage the impacts of growth and the resources available to fund the town's share of growth costs, managing the impacts of inflation both on our operating and our capital budgets, as well as assisting departments in attaining grant funding opportunities. As always, we will continue to support the organization in making key decisions from a financial sustainability lens. Technology needs are changing constantly. We need to ensure that we have the technology in place to support the organization as we increase our online capabilities and digital offerings. As we consider emerging technologies such as AI and gain some experience through pilots, we are monitoring the need for privacy impacts and the need for policies and procedures. Julie spoke about building our data management capabilities. We also need to build our records and information management capabilities. This is managed by our clerk's department. The importance of data protection and information privacy continues to grow. It is crucial that we proactively address these concerns and comply with relevant legislation. Having a records strategy and framework in place to ensure that we have a reliable corporate repository for our records is increasingly important. All of these issues point to the need for strength in our corporate services so that we can proactively support our departments and program areas in the delivery of their service. Touching on some of the 2024 key commission initiatives, as John mentioned, we continue to monitor the cost of growth, and he mentioned the impact that we've seen to date, primarily from the phase-in of the development charge rates as well as the rate freeze. Going forward, it's important that we continue to track this, especially as the province is looking at the definition for affordable and attainable housing, ineligible services, etc. The impact of these legislative changes is going to continue to grow. Being able to track it will assist us in our discussions with the province on their commitment to keep us whole. We'll also need to consider the limitations on our ability to collect development charges and parkland fees as a result of all these legislative changes, and what that means to us as we complete our master plans. And in early January, we'll be upgrading the audio in the council chambers. Julie mentioned public identity and access management. This work will create a central repository that contains all customer data in a uniform manner and ensuring that customers have control of their data in accordance with privacy legislation. It'll enable us to provide digital services in an efficient, customer-first, and risk-mitigated manner. We'll also be supporting the climate action team with recommendations from the task force on climate-related financial disclosures. Of course, we'll be undergoing a budget process again next year. Under electronic records and information management, the work will focus on modernizing and improving our electronic records management. Strengthening our corporate records and information management will reduce risk and create operational efficiencies. This past year, we've been working hard on the implementation of our property tax software. We're quite excited about it as it will have online capabilities for our residents and businesses. However, there have been some delays on the vendor side, which are impacting the timelines for the delivery and go live date of this project. We had originally hoped to go live by the end of this year. It now looks like it will be Q3 of next year. And that's because as the vendor has delayed us, it's delayed some of our testing. I think 58% of our revenue comes from taxation. We have to ensure we have that fully tested before we go live. It's a key interaction with the public and we can't have any errors. Our bylaw consolidation project continues in 2024 with the implementation of a solution based on the findings of the review that we undertook this year. And ensuring employees have the training and skills necessary to do their work is a key priority. This year, we will be replacing our current end-of-life learning management system to ensure that we have a modern and efficient system to deliver training across the organization. I mentioned earlier that Office 365 was deployed to council. Next year, we'll be deploying it to all staff. And in support of our diversity and inclusion initiatives, we will be reviewing our policies with an inclusion lens and developing a learning and development plan. And finally, our soft phone implementation will result in the elimination of most of our desk phones, producing ongoing efficiencies as we go forward. So Julie mentioned the lean reviews that were undertaken. This year, we undertook 2 lean reviews in our procurement processes as well as in our human resources approvals. Both of these reviews are still underway. However, the results look very positive. Early signs point to improvements that will result in the reduction in the number of approvals, reduced errors, and increase the ease of use. The number of purchasing approvals are expected to be cut in half, and the time to onboard new staff will be significantly reduced. The new business support team that will be shared between corporate services and community services will assist us in further lean reviews, as well as embedding corporate initiatives such as diversity and inclusion into our program areas. And I wanted to highlight the work that ITS did on implementing our one device policy. It has resulted in the elimination of 1,262 devices valued at $1.6 million. These were primarily desktops at the end of their useful life. And what this has done is reduced our infrastructure renewal costs going forward as we no longer have to replace those units, as well as supporting the technology. I mentioned earlier that there were some staff resources embedded in the budget to support corporate services. These positions have been included in the budget to give us the support we require to ensure that we can meet the needs of the organization and address gaps that currently exist. The human resources positions support the strategic side of HR and the development of strategies to address some of the issues I've mentioned earlier, such as recruitment and retention of staff, as well as supporting the IDEA initiatives. The position in political governance will support the need for records and information management across the town, as well as ensuring privacy of information in accordance with legislative requirements. And the ITS positions support our cybersecurity strategy and assist in strengthening our cybersecurity practices and protect our data. Council requested information on hearings and litigation spending versus the budget. This slide shows the spending as well as the budget over the last 20 years. Our policy is to supplement the budget through the tax stabilization reserve if we require it. As John mentioned in his overview, the tax stabilization reserve is healthy and can fund excess hearing and litigation costs should it be necessary. So that completes my overview of the corporate services operating budget. I'll just speak briefly on our capital budget. We're a very small portion of the overall capital program at just 3%. And while this slide shows some of the highlights on some of the capital projects we'll be undertaking, I won't spend too much time on it, as I think I've highlighted most of them when I spoke about our 2024 initiatives. We do have funding in there to support new and replacement hardware and software, as well as $1 million towards our multi-year initiative on our enterprise payment program. This will allow us to bring in a new program replacing end-of-life technology. And I think all the others I have already spoken to. That concludes my presentation, and I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you very much, Commissioner Councillor Adams.
Thanks very much. Could staff provide a table of the numbers that were on the legal slide that you had?
Certainly, we can do that.
Thanks.
Yeah.
And Councillor Lischina.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you for that presentation, Yancy. Just a quick question about property tax software. So the online self-serve capabilities. What other jurisdictions have that already? Do we know?
That's a good question. I'm not sure how many have it.
Okay, just because my question about the vendor being delayed, I wanted to check if this was a vendor that's already done this type of work in other municipalities, and what are we unique? Something else going on? So just, it doesn't have to be answered now, but I'm curious about that. Thank you.
I will note it's not unique. We are working with a vendor who is developing the software as we go, and they're working with many municipalities, and the other municipalities are experiencing the same delays as us. So Burlington, for instance, is experiencing the same delay. I think we are a little unique in wanting our online portal available to residents, but I'm not sure that that's the total holdup. It's just simply there are not a lot of vendors out there to support property tax, and so they're working with a lot of municipalities, and I think keeping up with getting the software developed, meeting all the requirements everyone has, is taking longer than what anyone expected.
Okay, so do we know what, I mean, even in staff time savings that self-serve online for property tax would equal to? Like, obviously we would use that staff for other things we need, but do we have any idea what that would be?
Just to answer your question on online, I've been told that only Toronto has self-serve right now, so we would be the next to have it. As far as the online goes, it will create some efficiencies as customers, instead of calling in, they can look it up themselves. But the town is growing, and so the department is just keeping pace with the growth. This will allow us to focus on tax policy, ensuring that we maintain customer service. We get a lot of calls on taxation, so we need to ensure that we have that. So without adding additional resources, it'll allow us to keep up with our customer service expectations.
Thank you very much. Councillor Chi.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Oh, thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you very much, for Nancy, for your presentation. So I have one question about, so you mentioned about, so there will be upgrade the audio system in here chamber, council chamber. So personally, I don't see any problem about this audio system. I would rather to spend the money to upgrade our audio system in our South Central. So would you clarify this?
So the audio upgrades are planned to enhance the sound with the online and remote. We need to ensure that we have that. We will be upgrading the technology in the meeting rooms as well. So that will follow the council chamber work.
Okay, understand. Is there any idea about the south entry in the audit system, because when we host some event, it's barely to hear on that. It's very bad system.
It's very tricky because the atrium, the way it was designed, and I am not an expert, we could bring Sam to speak to it a bit more, but the way it was designed, it is very, very difficult to get good sound there. It would take a significant investment to improve it. We are looking down the road at replacing town hall, so spending that money now to invest in that, I'm not sure we would want to go down that route, but certainly looking forward to the new facility, that is something that will be taken into consideration.
Okay, thank you, Nancy.
Thank you, Councillor McNeese.
Thank you, through you, Chair O'Meara. I just had a quick question about, you mentioned an Aspiring Leaders program, and I was wondering if, I think it said it was the first time at it, which I think is a great idea. I was wondering, is it internal for existing staff, or are you using it as a tool to attract staff from across the region or Ontario? And I'm just using as an example, Toronto has an urban fellowship program or a fellowship program to attract talent from almost across Canada for aspiring leaders in municipal government. And I think it's worked quite well. They've got about a 10 or 12 year track record. So just wanted to learn a little more about aspiring leaders at the town.
So it really is an internal program, and it is to support staff that are looking for advancement in their careers and haven't yet had that opportunity to move into a supervisory level. And so it provides them with some training and skills to help them in their career progression.
Okay, yeah, if I could just make the suggestion for some thought about it as a tool to attract outside talent. I think it's worked quite well with Toronto's program, which I believe is modeled off of a program in New York City as well to attract talent, because I know that's a challenge for everybody nowadays. So just throw that in the suggestion box.
We will take that away.
Thank you very much, Councillor. Councillor Knoll.
A very quick question, just on the tax software, Mr. Chair. I'm curious, will that online tax service be available through the overall portal with a one sign-in kind of initiative, or will this be something standalone? And if it is one sign-in, what sort of, considerations are being given to security?
It will be one sign-in. Security is critical. I'm not sure, John, if we can.
Security?
Yeah. It may be Sam that's best to speak to that. I'm not sure. Sam, if you can help me out.
Through you, Councillor O'Meara. Yes, we've done a PIA, a privacy impact assessment, and a TRA, threat risk assessment on the software. All mitigating steps have been taken into account before we go live. As far as a single sign-on is concerned, we may not initially go live with single sign-on, but there is a plan to get us there once we have the public identity and access management solution in place.
Thank you. We all know that we've seen what's happened in both Burlington and Halton Hills in the years gone by, and we certainly don't want to see that same sort of cyberware attack happening and ransomware attack happening in Oakville with our constituents' valuable personal information. So thank you for that response.
Thank you very much, Commissioner. Any other questions? I don't see any. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
We're making great headway. I believe Commissioner Garb, you're up to bat.
Thank you, Chair O'Meara and members of Budget Committee. I am pleased to present the Community Development Commission's budget for 2024. For reference, you can find our information in tabs 2, 3, 5, 9, 10, and 28. The slide that we always open with is a program-based view of our services. Our services in community development include building services, municipal enforcement, economic development, planning services, and strategic business services, which has our GIS and modernization programs in it. We are, you can see on this slide, that our net operating budget is quite small, but you can also see the significant impact that non-tax revenue plays for the town and for our commission, $30 million from the non-tax supported sources. Our commission is dominated by growth management focus area. Effective management of growth today points the town toward positive direction in the other focus areas in the future. Community belonging, environmental sustainability, and accountable government rely and depend on how well we manage growth today. It's been a great but a busy year for our small but mighty economic development team, and I did want to focus on some of their accomplishments from 2023. The successful the Digital Main Street program has been a great take-up rate. The post-COVID first ICI Realtor engagement event was held in 23. And site selection honored Oakville as one of Canada's best locations to invest. We had the successful launch of our film office, which was slightly interrupted by the writers and actors strike, but activities are still ongoing. Oakville also leads the way in the Auto Mayor's agenda and supported through our economic development. Highlighting a few of the outcomes from 2023, resource challenges have been had an impact in enforcement services, and the town's ability to respond to bylaw and licensing investigations will be improved with proposed additions in enforcement staff. We are still seeing challenges in the office sector as the workplace adjusts in the post-COVID era. However, while we've already seen over 1 million square feet of industrial permits issued in 2023, which will add to the supply of industrial buildings once constructed, industrial vacancy remains at critical levels, and we would like to explore new ways of servicing employment lands with the region. New beginning in this year is the Bill 109 refund measures. So far, we're very pleased that we haven't had to issue any refunds, and we are hopeful that with the additions to staffing levels and community infrastructure and building, and through refinement to our processes, our exposure will be minimal. Building file digitization will be complete by August of next year, and to date, we're approximately 40% complete. You can see the success of our ticket resolution program, the last two measures. Tickets not resolved through a town-run program contributes to overcrowded courts and unsuccessful resolution. I will note that on our operating budget slide that building service is a fully funded program. However, the Committee of Adjustment is in building services, which is partially supported by tax revenue. So it shows a small impact on taxes. Again, $30 million of non-tax revenue contributes to the relatively small net tax-supported operating budget. In addition to the inflationary pressures of employee costs, going down the line in strategic business services, that unit operationalizes the modernization program among other continuous improvement programs and technical maintenance. An ongoing demand management and improvements to online services leads us to include the conversion of a contract staff to full-time to maintain our online gains. In planning services, it sees an overall drop with the increased fees and steady expenditures in that department. There is a measure of risk in that the economy and development activity seems to be sagging. We'll have to keep an eye on that. Municipal enforcement is proposing the addition of 4 permanent staff in place of contract staff approved last year. The increase is offset in part with additional revenue generated by officers. Economic development reflects the 0.3 full-time staff for the patio program administration, and building services is adding a fully funded zoning review position as well as an energy advisor. Things that we're keeping an eye on. Artificial intelligence is something that we are looking towards. A 7-year digital plan for property development, of which the Planning Hub is a part, which you'll hear about a little bit later, to ensure we're prepared for the future and we can leverage the opportunities such as the application of AI in our business. Like most departments, finding professional staff is and will be a continuing challenge. We are watching the economy and recognize that reduction in development activity impacts revenues, workloads, and in a broader sense, our achieving of the provincial housing pledge expectations. The challenge of delivering complete communities will be with us going forward. Delivering the human-centered infrastructure to meet the future needs of our communities is ever present. Approaching community planning, like we're doing for Midtown, allows us to see the opportunities and challenges in delivering the housing that we need in a way that supports our urban structure as a way of providing essential services like parks and transit. It will be a busy year as we move closer to complete the official plan review. Midtown, Uptown, Nayagawa are all on the horizon in 2024. Housing strategy and action planning is in front and center in 24 as well. With the economic development plan, we hope to introduce a plan and criteria for making use of the municipal accommodation tax, the revenue and reserve. Related to environmental sustainability, just note the electrification of our fleet, as well as the energy coach for energy retrofits. Related to the energy advisor, the town has set ambitious climate and energy goals through the 2019 Climate Emergency Declaration and the 2020 Community Energy Strategy. One of the 4 core areas of the Community Energy Strategy is homes and buildings, with homes accounting for 27% of Oakville's greenhouse gas emissions. However, home energy efficiency has often been a challenging area for municipals to tackle due to the lack of control over the energy supply, limitations around the building code, and homeowner actions. While the town cannot require homes to be built to a higher energy efficiency standard than prescribed by the building code, building services and climate action staff can play a role to help encourage and advance home energy retrofits through the permitting process for existing homes. Through research done by the Climate Action, a key gap and opportunity where municipalities can play an effective role is in the homeowner education and awareness space. Lack of awareness of home energy retrofits and their benefits is a significant barrier to the adoption of home energy retrofits. While there are many rebate and incentive programs available for homeowners to help finance energy retrofits, the application process can be onerous and overwhelming, difficult to navigate, and homeowners often do not know where to start. There is a significant need for guidance and support, both with helping to identify home energy retrofits most beneficial to their particular home, and with navigating the process to complete a retrofit. This initiative directly supports the Climate Emergency Declaration, the Community Energy Strategy, and the corporate objective of climate action as a whole. Turning to the parking management strategy, we're looking to advance the commercial permit parking segment separate from the North Oakville review, but both occurring in 24. And we are continuing our aggressive pursuit of modernization toward increased online services. Efficiencies are challenging when the environment is largely driven by legislative processes and directions, especially through the growth mandate and downloading and uploading and sideloading that is taking place in the province. Throughout the years, planning has been looking for process efficiencies to mitigate the impact of the ever-increasing demands from legislative changes and downloaded responsibilities. Planning went through an extensive review 3 years ago and looked at staffing levels. Legislative changes compels us to continue to look at our processes. Efficiencies in process will allow us to realign resources to meet our legislative obligation with the goal of balancing the prospect of refunds and not overstaffing. Another building innovation is the way we look at applications. Instead of passing a permit among experts and along with it the point of contact resulting in confusion and delay, having a single project-based approach to permits allows a customer a consistent point of contact throughout the process. Work to advance the Planning Hub has a great potential to provide efficiencies in reporting by leveraging partnerships with our software provider, Esri, together with other big city municipalities. With a small investment, we're aiming to centralize data management and integrate data sets, reduce the burden from data requests and reporting requirements, improve collaboration and communication, provide a streamlined and holistic planning approach, empower evidence-based decision-making, and enhance transparency. The digitization program in building services, where we're turning paper files into digital records, is 40% complete and will be 100% complete by Q3 of next year. We are reclaiming 835 square feet of space currently occupied by files. The addition of 4 compliance officers, mobile compliance officers, creates the opportunity for the investigators to focus on other areas such as business licensing and property standards. Adding capacity in the mobile compliance area allows us and creates capacity in all other aspects of enforcement, having positive effects on investigation timing and complaint clearance. The seasonal patio and zoning examiner positions council would have seen as part of the budget reports earlier in September. We've invested significantly in our online tools and offerings. It takes resources to make sure these advances are sustained and built upon to meet the growing demand for online services. Data reporting and tracking, such as the new provincial reporting requirements and evidence-based decision-making, are facilitated by the addition of this resource. As described in the previous slide, an energy advisor that is fully funded by building permit revenues is being proposed as well. Turning to our capital budget, we have a relatively small, in comparison to the larger programs, our capital program. Some of the highlights, you can see that it's dominated by planning studies. I also wanted just to highlight the Planning Hub implementation. The Planning Hub will be a one-stop online resource for planning and development information and data such as demographics, employment, residential data, growth forecast, housing target tracking, development pipelines, number of units, and much more. And the Hub will allow us to incorporate dashboards, interactive maps, analytics, and insights, which will enable us to do more accurate forecasting and scenario planning, track the development pipeline, and facilitate more collaboration and engagement. A small investment of $40,000 will allow us to leverage our existing resources and partnerships to enable holistic planning approach based on data-driven decision-making, resulting in improved collaboration and communication. Building Services has also been undergoing a significant program of modernization dating back to 2021, including the portal for online applications, digitization of records, one-call inspections, dormant building permit closeout, giving the applicants the information they need as early as practical creates a more transparent approval process, increasing the likelihood that a complete application will be made. Complete applications are key in faster approvals as it reduces the delays caused with information gathering and coordination. Simplifying our folders and created data standards will allow for quicker and more accurate reporting of our activities, creating a better environment for continuous and agile improvements to our services. Being aware of technology trends will allow for better decisions in how we invest our time and money and supporting our staff through the impact of change. And with that, Mr. Chair, I'll turn it back to you for questions.
Thank you very much, Commissioner. I don't see any questions. Oh, now they go. There they are. We'll go with Councillor Lischner first.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Mr. Gorby. Could you make any further comments about the AI, emerging tech? Are you aware of it being used? I mean, obviously there's positives and negatives. Are you aware of any projects or any other municipalities where they're starting to use AI to simplify processes or help in that regard?
I would characterize that through you, Mr. Chair, as in the study phase. I think most municipalities are trying to figure out a lot of the policies, the privacy issues related to that, but then also looking forward to things like digital twin and some of the other advanced geographic integration that's emerging now, and how AI can be leveraged in those technologies that are emerging. So it's still I'm not aware of any. Perhaps Ralph, you know. We're not really, it's really emerging, and we're really focused on some of those things that are integrating the 3D modeling and so on right now.
Thank you, Commissioner. Councillor Hazeltine.
Thank you, through you, Chair O'Meara. When you talk about the planning hub and some of all the digitalization that's happening, and we've heard Mont said that over the last few years as we start to make progress, is there a way the public can get feedback on or data results? So I guess what I'm looking for is we make these assumptions that this is going to make it faster or more effective for the public. How are we reporting that out in terms of success? Because we continue to obviously hear some frustrations about where are we at and how much progress are we really making?
Through you, Mr. Chair, that's a great point, and I think that through the planning hub, actually, if I could have the presentation back up, I do have a prototype that we're working on, and we hope to release hopefully as soon as the first quarter of next year, and you can see how that provides additional information. If you, so this is the type of thing, this is actually in the beta testing stage right now. You can see how this provides demographic information that we routinely get, and people can really use the self-service functions. But on the transparency side of things, which is to more your point, the intention is that we'll be able to report things out, things like you've seen through our reporting to the province on the frequency, the number of applications that are being filed, how it relates to the housing pledge, how it relates to the pipeline that we've had many questions about. So all that the intention is all that information to be publicly accessible, and just adds to that the transparency that we know is helpful to the community.
So thank you for that, and thank you for making that a priority. I'm curious about vacancy rates. So there was some earlier this year for the budget for this year, there was some headcount increases. What is the current vacancy rate in the commission around planning and mobile compliance? Are we fully staffed, and is the addition of these extra headcounts you're proposing, is there a risk that they would be gapped?
Through you, Mr. Chair, I would say in our enforcement area, it's probably right now harder to maintain staff, and that's why we're looking to convert those 4 positions from contract to permanent. We've had, I would say, not a great deal of success at retaining staff when they're on contract, and that's true across the whole commission, probably across the whole corporation. As we've seen that we have a number of vacancies in planning services, but we are beginning to turn that corner and become more fully occupied, if I can use those words. But it has been a challenge, I will say, that we've had some resignations, people moving to different communities for advancement. So I'm not exactly sure if I'm answering your question directly, but today we're pretty good. Tomorrow it may change. How's that?
Well, so you answered my question in part. I really do think it's important the public understand what our staffing levels are and what our vacancy is. It speaks to how hard individuals are working to fill the support gaps that exist. And as a prior human resources professional for 30 plus years, I get the pressure it puts on the current team, but we also need to be tracking, are we really making progress to turn the corner? Because you and the other commissioners have talked about the need to invest in retention and to having a strategy around that. So if it could be reported out, that would be great, and I appreciate your comments.
Thank you. And just to elaborate, what I neglected was building services is also probably the most critical right now, and we're facing a number of retirements, and we're trying to think of different ways of training younger staff who are maybe in more junior positions, providing them training opportunities so that they are retained throughout the process. And so, but that is a industry-wide, as well as planning and a lot of the other professional services, a real challenge. And thank you for your comments. We do have to change the way we think about how we recruit and retain staff.
Well, my only additional comment, and thank you for that additional feedback, is Councillor McNeese's comment about aspiring leaders and a more outward approach to it. I'm just curious how much we leverage Sheridan College and those individuals. I know that I've poked a little bit about making sure we optimize the architectural technologist program there, but they have a wealth of talent, and I'm always amazed how quickly they can get up to speed. And from a building inspector perspective, they're actually a pipeline to help in that area as well.
Thank you, Councillor, for your comments. And we've actually, in the last couple of years, really leveraged that, especially the co-op programs. Building services, actually one of the apps that the wizard that we're just about to finalize was developed by a Sheridan College student. We have one in our SBS area who's taking on the role of a lot of technical help with us. Your words are timely, and we'll certainly try to leverage that in the future.
Thank you very much, Councillor. Speaking of co-op, I know there are some co-op students here right now that we're trying to, we're telling you there's jobs here later. Councillor McNeese.
Thank you. Through you, Chair O'Meara. Just two comments. So on the operating side, the zoning bylaw review, I wonder if throughout that process, it's worth exploring the community planning permit system, what a bylaw could look like for that. I think there's just a lot of potential cost savings and streamlining if we look at that. And now that Burlington has posted theirs, we might be able to get some insights on how a municipality of our size could handle something like that. So curious if that could be part of the scope or if it's a separate project. And then just on the capital side, I noticed, Bronny, obviously we have parking concerns and that there was a budget line item of 0.06, Bronny parking lot on Jones Street. Just wanted some clarification if that's the parkhead at Jones in Ontario Street or something different. So two questions, yeah.
Through you, Mr. Chair, the Jones Street is the parkhead that you're referring to. Related to the community planning permit system, it is a separate project, but I think that through the Midtown project, we'll be able to leverage some of the policy capacity in that area to understand how and where we can apply the community planning permit system. So I should have more on that in the coming weeks, but thank you for your comments, and it's certainly worth exploring.
Okay, and just to follow up, yeah, I think with the CPPS, you know, it seemed like, you know, we can sort of reduce a bit of staff time, streamline some things. And I think there's just all around savings of, you know, potentially being able to avoid appeals and things that really sort of bogs down the process, and especially with all the pressures coming from the province. But I understand your response, and I'll leave it with you there. And then on the Brawny Parquet, I guess my request would be that if we can do some public consultation before we make that decision, because I know we're in sort of we have a lot of parking concerns, but I think I want to make sure we get the right approach, and we're waiting on a parking study. You know, and talked a little concerned when we're pulling away some park space, which is also in demand, and understand, you know, what people are using it for or not using it for. And just making sure that we're not just trying to grab any space that we can, but we're getting it at the right location where we're having problems, and it's going to help kind of solve our bigger problem. So I'll leave it at that.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Commissioner. No other questions? So committee, I'm really at your pleasure right now. It says that we're going to break for lunch, or we can keep going. We've got 4 issues. I'm just not sure how much we're going to bite off in these issues, or whether there were a lot of questions. I just maybe poll committee to see what you want to do right now. Councillor Adams?
Are we intending to continue all the way through all the commissions today, or are we going to Thursday? Can you tell us what the plan is?
I believe we're going to be doing the other commissions on Thursday. So that's the plan. So we've got the discussion items right now, 1, 2, 3, 4 items to go over that are in our booklet now, and then we're going to finish with the other commissions on Thursday.
Then I would, I don't think there's going to be a whole lot of discussion and debate on.
Well, that's what I was thinking too.
I would give you a motion to deal with the items 5.1, 5.2, 5.3, and I guess 5.4
yeah, so those
passing those on to Thursday?
No, those are our items that we're going to be discussing right now, and then moving to receive them. So I don't know whether there's going to be any comment or questions of staff on any of those items, but I would need motions on all 4 of them at some point.
I gave you a motion to move all 4 of them.
Perfect. So are there any discussion on any of these items, or any questions of staff on any of those items? Councillor Haslett-Thiel.
Thank you, Chair O'Meara. Just in terms of the rates and fees, so is the motion to receive it versus approve it as presented? I just want clarity. Because I thought we were allowing for discussion and public review of the rates and fees and coming back to it. And forgive me if I've missed something.
Through you, Chair O'Meara. So for today, we just need you to receive them. They're being reviewed for implementation. They will be approved by council at the appropriate time when we finalize the budget process.
Okay, so my further question then, and maybe comments, is could staff provide at an upcoming meeting how the other performing arts centers that, I'm not going to say we compete with, but are similar in size, if our rental fees are similar in comparison. And I'd also like to understand a bit more about the road closure fee for the BIA. The increase is quite substantial. If it is cost-based, then happy to hear that information and that clarity, but it is a large jump.
Through you, Chair O'Meara, I believe that Commissioners Bell and Fu could probably touch on that in their commission presentations on Thursday, not to force more stuff on them, but I'm sure they can answer those.
Good. Happy to wait till Thursday.
Okay, perfect. So we have moved by Councillor Adams items 5.1, 5.2, 5.3, and 5.4. Any objections? Seeing none, those carried. Thank you for that. We have no confidential discussion items. I will just remind everyone that the United Way Barbecue is today, and it's in the cafeteria. Everyone is welcome to join and to participate and to spend your money wisely for a great cause. We will be back here Thursday morning to go over the last commissions, and there is a hold in your calendars for Friday, but that was for spillover. The way we're going, I think we'll be okay with that. So just giving everyone a heads up. And just for those who are watching online, that the public will be able to delegate on October 31st. In the day, or November 1st in the evening. That's when we'll be looking for anyone from the public or any stakeholders to come in and tell us what they think, and any thoughts or any concerns or questions they may have. We'll be happy to hear them at that point. And with that, we are adjourned. Thank you.